Hello, everyone, and welcome to One Control Board Podcast, episode 357. My name's Benjamin Yoder. It's a late night episode, baby. It has been a long time since I've had this kind of episode where it's like 10 p.m. on Sunday. Gotta get this done. Gotta get this out. I've been, if you don't know, I'm going to be at Portland Retro Game Expo shortly here, showing off the PCFX at a booth and hopefully talking to people about the system and stuff like that. So it's taken a lot of prep work. And so, maybe more than I thought. And I kind of had to drop everything to really focus in on that and try to get that done. So, this weekend was pretty much just trying to tie together as many knots, ends, as I could. And I'm not quite there yet, but I'm getting very close, and I am really hoping that tomorrow I can feel pretty confident about where I'm at. So we'll see. It's kind of close, but I think once you start sitting down and putting things together, it's like, oh God, everything's happening. So we're recording just a little bit late, but that doesn't mean we're not going to have an amazing discussion about video games. Amazing. That's what I call this show. Amazing. Only the most least prepared content I make. So anyways, what are we talking about in this episode? Well, guess what? There are game announcements that I want to talk about. Wow, Ben, game announcements. What's going on there? Tell you in a minute. Tell you in a second. We're going to take a little bit of a weird detour. The Brave Exvius developer. We're going to talk about their financials a little bit. Something was interesting in there. I want to talk about it. And then also in my multiplayer group, I recently played through the game Mercenary Kings. I think it's like a 10-year-old game now. I think it's been around a long time. And I think I found it was actually originally a Kickstarter game, which I was kind of surprised by. But, Kickstarter just isn't really something I think about very often anymore. Except for when it rarely shows up when there's a chibi robo game that we're gonna make on Kickstarter. That's when I expect a Kickstarter to show up. So yeah. So that's gonna be our episode today. But just as a heads up, before we get too deep into it, because I'll be at Portland Retro Game Expo next week, rather the week after, I'm gonna be basically still out. I'm going to go on a little bit of an extended vacay. Because I didn't really take any vacations this year, and I will be gone. And if you're from last episode, I kind of said, hey, I have to figure out what to do about that episode that will go live the day I get back. I am just not going to do an episode that day, so I am going to skip an episode. But that doesn't mean the Hot Pot Gaming thing that comes out next week that will still come out next week. And then also with that, there's going to be a featured video that's going to come out as well. So look forward to that. But yeah, the actual normal podcast, I'm going to take a little skip. We're going to do a little 2 week vacay, I guess. I don't know, 2 weeks whatever. Just so you know, before we get too deep into this episode. So I've been doing that a lot, like in between segments. Here's a news story I didn't think I would ever be talking about. Freedom Wars is kind of back. If you don't remember, Freedom Wars was a PlayStation Vita Monster Hunter style game that was interesting because it was co-developed by 3 different companies. Japan Studio at Sony, Shift, who developed God Eater and Code Vein, and then also Dimps. And Dimps has done a large variety of stuff over the years. But for some reason, maybe it's just because of one game, but Freedom Wars seem to have kind of stuck with them the most. I don't know what the separation of work and stuff was on that project, but if you played Sword Art Online Fatal Bullet, it more or less is the Freedom Wars sequel with less budget for sure. and a little bit of different, quality to the gameplay. I feel like there's a lot of things similar between Freedom Wars and Fatal Bullet, but at the end of the day, they are very different games, but just kind of the core ideas. So apparently Dimps has been wanting to do a sequel for a while, and then they couldn't really get it green lighted. So they recently were able to get Sony to allow them to have Bandai Namco publish the game instead. So they're doing an HD re-release of Freedom Wars. It's going to include all downloadable content. It's not going to include any new content. And there's also, it sounds like they're going to make some changes to the game itself to kind of make the controls a little bit better. And then also there's a thing where when you were making weapons in Freedom Wars, that was kind of like a randomized stat growth. And then you could also, and like that stat growth couldn't be taken back essentially. So what people would do is they would basically try to upgrade their weapon, back up their save file, and then once they upgraded the weapon, if they didn't get the result they wanted, they would just reload their old save file. And that's not as easy as just going and loading again, because it would save when you upgrade your weapon. So you had to back up your save file and then reload it on the Vita and things like that. Ultimately, it was a kind of annoying process, and it sounds like they're aware of that, and they're going to try to fix that as well. The one downside of this is that it's on a variety of platforms. Actually, I don't know if it's on Xbox. I'm kind of curious. Let me see if I can figure that out. But it's on Switch, it's on PC, it's on PlayStation platforms, all that kind of stuff. I don't see Xbox on this list, but they're not doing crossplay except for between PS4 and PS5, which I feel like with multiplayer games these days, it's really important for population reasons, I feel like. And so while I understand that it's not easy to do, and then also I don't know if like Sony's still charging for crossplay and stuff like that. I think it is really important for your population, but at the same time, Freedom Wars is a game you can solo. It's not like a competitive shooter or something like that, where like your game lives or dies based off, your population. So it doesn't really have that problem, but it just kind of stinks a little bit. So I think I will probably buy this game at launch, but I probably won't play it. And the reason why, it's probably going back to kind of the Baten Kaitos situation where like, I don't want to play Baten Kaitos HD. I think it looks pretty iffy visually. And then also like, I just don't think I'll have time to play that anytime soon. If I do have time, I'll play the GameCube version probably. But I got the GameCube version of the game for like $10 used. Or in the case of Baten Kaitos Origins, I got it for like $15 new, right? So these games I was buying at prices that were well below their original MSRP. And despite them being some of my favorite games, I just don't feel like I supported them, right? In some ways, there's no way I could know, right? And so Freedom Wars is one of those games where I got it for $5 on the Vita. And I love it. I think it's great. It's not one of the best Monster Hunter style games I've played, but it is definitely one of the most interesting Monster Hunter style games, And so, if you listen to this podcast, that's important to me, that something is interesting. And I just don't feel like I supported the game because of that, even though I like it so much. So I will probably go ahead and buy it just outright, just to give them my full money. I don't mind doing that as long as, I'm financially capable to do so in a reasonable, responsible way, right? Especially for games like this, where it's like, this game was really good. I really loved it. I would love to support it. But I don't think I'll play the multiplayer in it unless somebody pulls me into it. My multiplayer group seemed kind of interested in it, but they also had played it quite a bit back in the day. So I'll be curious to see when or if. And then also, that group is a little touchy on certain things where it's like, oh, it doesn't run at 60 frames per second properly, and they'll probably say, I don't want to, or something like that, right? Or like, oh, they removed this feature, they censored that, right? That kind of thing. And so there's a potential something like that could happen, and we wouldn't be able to play it anyways. But a good chunk of the group, I think, still would be interested even with that. So we'll see. Either way, I'm going to pick it up. I think it's really cool. They did talk about potentially doing a sequel if this is successful. That's language that I personally just don't really trust very much. The people say it all the time. Obviously, at the end of the day, if a certain number of people buy a game, absolutely. But I don't think individuals should feel responsible for trying to like crowdfund a sequel, essentially, by buying the game, right? And, that sounds a little silly saying that like, hey, I want to support this game, right? But at the end of the day, I think that's more of just me showing appreciation for Freedom Wars. And if Freedom Wars 2 doesn't get made, I'm perfectly okay not spending... I'm perfectly okay with that, spending that money still at the end of the day. So I'm saying, don't buy it expecting something, right? That's really the big thing. I'm buying it with the expectation of Freedom Wars 2 will never happen. But, if enough people pick it up, maybe it will. So who knows? Who can say? But I have no hope. So anyways, I think the Monster Hunter space is just a space that I would really love to see more really cool stuff be made there. And I think I'm really loving Wild Hearts. Been playing Wild Hearts with my friends over the last couple months. Really digging that game. I can't wait to talk about it at some point. Just mechanically really solid, really cool. It doesn't really succeed in a lot of the areas that I like Tokiden for. But at the same time, even though it's like a Tecmo Koei joint along with EA in this particular case, I think it's cool that the games have different priorities and different focuses. But story is definitely Wild Heart's weak point in my opinion. So, but getting back to Dimps actually, so they also are working on Sword Art Online Fractured Daydream. So this is, I believe, their second Sword Art Online game, with Fatal Bullet being their last big one. And Fatal Bullet, as far as I'm aware, did very well for them. And they spent a lot of time doing extra content for that game. And, if you followed the Chronicles of Fatal Bullet with me, you'll know I bought every DLC pack for basically full price, trying to get something out of that game. And unfortunately, it didn't really work out. But the Fractured Daydream is their new game coming out in the next week or so. From when I'm recording this, I believe it's the end of September or early October, one of those two. And it is a game that has some cool ideas in it, in the sense of it seems to be mashing together all of the Sword Art Online worlds into one game. And then each of those characters you have different play styles. So, you are kind of in fantasy land with the girl with the submachine gun kind of thing, right? And that doesn't mean that stuff hasn't existed before in some ways in Fatal Bullet, but I feel like this game is doing a little bit more of that direct clash versus some of the other games. I feel like it's more of aesthetically, you're in kind of a very similar looking area to another game in Sword Art Online, but still at the end of the day, the monsters are reflective of kind of the futuristic feel. But it's kind of just fun to be able to fight a giant orc with a shield with a submachine gun kind of thing. So I played a little bit of the beta with a friend of mine, and I think there's things I like about it so far. One thing I really enjoy is that the leveling system in the multiplayer is not a total leveling system. So outside of the matches, you don't gain levels. You only gain levels within matches. And then once you do a new match or game, it then resets your level. And while that's kind of cool in my opinion, is that a lot of these games, in the kind of this more anime kind of RPG space, or maybe I should say previous Sword Art Online games, and then the other games I'm really thinking about are Kandagawa Jet Girls and Tsuner Kagura Peach Peach Splash. These games that don't really prioritize their multiplayer as much, because they really, I think, feel like they feel like there's a strong need for a single player campaign in those games. I think they have the problem of a lot of their rewards for single player comes down to grinding stuff. And so when you go to the multiplayer, the single player and multiplayer rewards just are really imbalanced. And the multiplayer typically is designed in a way that is focusing on people who have already played through the single player content. Now, obviously, I can't say that's for sure with this game, but I think they set a good groundwork for saying, hey, if you want to buy Sword Art Online Fractured Daydream and jump right into the multiplayer, it seems to be giving you that option. And it seems to be giving you enough options in terms of character choice and the ability to get different weapons and gear and things like that, that you probably would have a fairly substantial experience even without playing the single player. I mean, this is all just based off the initial first couple of quests in this beta. So take this with a grain of salt. But when I saw there, I think it looked very promising in that regard. So yeah, it's kind of interesting because basically you're divided. It's weird. It's you are grouped up in squads of 20. Well, it's more you have groups of 5, I think, within a squad of 20. So 4 groups within a squad. Does that make sense? So each group has 5 and then the squad has 20. Let's put it that way. And then so you all kind of go off and do your own little initial quest in your group, and then you do a secondary quest that connects you with one of the other groups, and then you do a final quest, usually the boss fight, that connects you with all the groups together. And so it becomes kind of a mess as all 20 people are wailing away on a boss and things like that. But I feel like each character, from what I played, feels like they play pretty substantially different. Admittedly, I was switching between different classes. So maybe, if I was just playing all ranger types, I wouldn't notice as much, right? But at least initially, they all feel pretty substantial. And I think it's a good variety. My friend did say, he's maybe you won't like it because it's Grand Blue Fantasy Relink. And look, Grand Blue Fantasy Relink still is just this weird thing I don't know what to do with. Like, there's a lot of just little things that bothered me about Relink, and I don't feel like I see that with Sword Art Online Fatal Bullet. And it might be Fractured Daydream. It might be different expectations. My expectations for a Sword Art Online game, not very high. I've played a couple of them, and they all feel very janky and very budget. And when it comes to story, there are cool things about their story, but I just don't really expect much. Where I think with Grand Blue Fantasy, there's probably more of a blank slate template kind of thing. And I think what I was really looking for in Relink was something that just felt a little bit more substantial in terms of storytelling, in terms of quest design, in terms of, maybe I should say multiplayer quest design. But I think at the end of the day, that game was doing exactly probably what it set out to do. If anything, it maybe over-delivered on what Grand Blue Fantasy Relink needed to do. But I don't know. I got it is like the Vanillaware bias I have, where like for some reason, every time I play a Vanillaware game, I'm just like, I don't like this. And I feel like Grand Blue Fantasy is a similar thing where like anytime I look at Grand Blue Fantasy, I'm like, man, I don't like this. And I don't know why. But maybe someday. It's weird because like Grand Blue Fantasy is just like super generic medieval swords and sorcery, which maybe is the problem, but that's Sword Art Online. So admittedly, Sword Art Online has like maybe it's not Sword Art Online actually, because Sword Art Online's got a bunch of weird stuff going on with it narratively. So I don't know. That's a pickle we will not. Wait, pickle? I was about to say untie a pickle, and then I was like, well, that's not right. Maybe deskin a pickle, but like, who peels their pickles? Are peeled pickles a thing? Actually, I don't know. I don't think I've ever seen a pickle without its skin. At least not one that has been bit into. Freedom Wars, man. We have another video game that got announced. Himitsu no Aipri. And you're like, Ben, what are you talking about? Himitsu no Aipri, that's already out. Well, let me tell you, the Nintendo Switch version of the hit arcade game. If you don't remember, this is the pre-Para arcade game, but the one specifically aimed towards younger girls. So how this functions, I explained this, I think, last week, but you're getting another lesson about this, is you have little cards, and it actually uses the Dragon Quest Crossplay machine. It's a little panel, a touch panel, and you move the cards around, and it, from what I remember, gameplay-wise, you kind of move the cards around to hit the different spots on the screen to line it up for the rhythm of the song, basically. They are bringing that game to home consoles, but it is not that same game. And it seems like basically what they're saying is like, hey, it's going to have all the music and stuff, and the characters specifically are going to have, it's going to have the characters from that as well, which the characters in Himitsu seems to be a lot more defined versus the other game where you're like doing a creative character. Again, I haven't played these games directly, so I could be wrong about this, but that's my understanding. So it seems to have the characters of that Himitsu game specifically, which I think they do overlap into the other game as well. So anyways, point being, it seems to be focused on the content of that game, but the card dragging around on the screen thing won't work, obviously. So it seems like they have adapted it to be a one-button rhythm game, which, given the target audience of younger girls below even the general younger age of the typical pre-par game, they have made it that one-button rhythm game, which aligns with that. So if anything, very Love and Berry like. So very simple, very straightforward. And they're also like bundling it with a bunch of mini games, and I think there's like an anime that they said they're basically basing the mini games on little events in the anime and things like that. So if you don't know, this is actually the second pre-Para game that has come out on Nintendo Switch. I was originally interested in the first one, but never quite got around to it. I think it's been almost 10 years since that thing came out. I could be wrong. It was pretty early in the Switch's life, I think. But anyways, I think I was looking forward on my first Japan trip, which was 2019. So it's been a while. Anyways, but the that game came out, and I never picked it up because the price just never dropped on it. I haven't checked in on it recently. Maybe I should, but I remember if anything, the price I think went up. So this game is the second game on the system, but it seems to be trying to serving a different audience. So I'm curious if it will drop down at all. I think at this point, would probably prefer to maybe pick up the original pre-Para game on Switch, preferably. just because that is an experience that I haven't really had. And I mean, Himitsu, I mean, I don't know. Himitsu just seems like, I feel like the arcade experience that I would want from a Himitsu. So unless there's like a way you can like drag your finger around on screen on Switch, I don't know. But anyways, I mean, if it's ever dirt cheap enough, I'd be happy to pick it up. But, for the full retail price, I don't really know. And I've got plenty of other Aikatsu, and I have a pretty cure dancing game and stuff around here. So I got rhythm games, cutesy rhythm games. We cheer, baby. We'll get there. I promise someday. Yokai Watch, just dance. Man, you guys ever hear like the English localization of those Yokai Watch songs? Because, oh boy, the lyrics to those songs, it's like who... Oh God, what is it? Dun 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 dun. There's like a song about like who pooped and like blaming it on your dad or something. I don't know. I'm probably mixing this up. I feel like I have less recollection of this. We love kids' rhythm game songs aimed about talking about your dads. Is daddy angry? And who pooed? Is it your daddy? I'm sorry. Welcome back to 10 p.m. podcasts. Anyways. Is there anything else to say about this? I don't think so. Yeah, let's move on. Now that all the children are listening, let's talk about Brave Exvius developers, financials. The developer's name's Gumi. Apparently, so there's been a pretty frequent series of losses. I forget how much. A yearly loss of 38 million yen, which I think might be around like is that 40? I'm not gonna do it. Go convert that if you want. I don't want to do that right now. They're losing a bunch of money. They put out a new live service game. If you don't know, Final Fantasy Brave Exvius is kind of their big game. And I'm trying to remember if they work on War of the Lions as well, but I think it's just Brave Exvius is their big one at least. And so they put out a new original IP live service game, and that basically bombed. And they were laying off employees, and they also, in Japan, they have to buy off employees or like basically give them compensation packages to leave, basically, because Japan's rules around laying off people and things like that. So I believe there's a note here. This is from an Automaton Media article. Their existing game devs shrunk by like 10% is their dev team. So basically, they're just doing cost cutting and things like that. And I think this is where I've been hearing about these guys through Automaton Media. Again, great website. Go read them. Like, if you're interested in Japanese news stories that are like very Japanese in the sense of like they are Japanese news stories translated into English about games, go for it. That's a great website. Anyways, but point being is that they have recently turned their fortune around because of those layoffs and things like that. But also they saw a really big bump in their other businesses, which gained a 300% growth. Now, what I didn't tell you is I'm tricking you into this being an article about blockchain and NFTs. We continue the trend of blockchain and NFTs coming right after Games for Girls. The reason I want to talk about this is because they announced that they had pretty significant profits in blockchain and NFTs. This says 570 million. Is this right, yen? That seems wrong. Either way, so they are accounting for profits. Again, that includes other businesses, but blockchain was like specifically singled out. The reason I want to talk about this is because I think this is the first time that we as a podcast have come across a financial report that talks about blockchain in a way that isn't about losses. So the thing I'm not 100% sure about is if these guys are developing games, and maybe actually, let me see if I can pull up their website or something real quick. Are they developing games around blockchain? Game developer, game company, let's do that. Are they developing games around blockchain and that's why they're successful? Or are they doing investments? So Automaton Media, I find typically on their website, they don't really get into this stuff very much, and totally reasonable. I think most people are just kind of done reading into this. I'm the weirdo that has to keep reading about it despite not knowing anything about this stuff. But they do, yeah, they have an entire section about blockchain at the bottom. Let me just kind of nose in here real quick. Okay, yes, they do have blockchain video games. I don't think they break it down into what is their successful ones or not. And they also have kind of this page that goes a little more in depth about them in general, doing NFT stuff. They apparently did the Mega Man X Dive stuff, the NFTs around that, street art NFT stuff. Anyways, I'm just looking at this now, but Capcom Taiwan is kind of their main partner along with Double Jump Tokyo, and it looks like a company called MCH, which I'm not familiar with. And it seems like their token project is Oshi, is what it's called. Oshi, and the E is a 3. Anyways, I'm doing live website reading to you right now. But yes. I think that what's interesting to me about this is that this is the first time I have heard this stuff be talked about in a positive way in terms of money making in a very long time. I'm pretty sure any of you guys who, were following this in any degree probably know the last time this stuff was talked about in a positive way when it came to financials, which was like back before the bust happened, if you want to call it that. I don't know what the right word would be. So I think it's really interesting that this is specifically something that they are saying is a growing space for them. I think, I forget if I said, but they said the other businesses category grew by 318%. Again, they don't specify how much of that is blockchain, but they do specifically call out blockchain as kind of their big thing in there. So it's interesting. The Automated Medium article about this doesn't have a lot of details beyond just offhandedly mentioning blockchain being successful for them. The source article they link, which is a website called, Otaku Soken. Is that the machine translation? That's the machine translation, which is just like a general otaku interests article or website in Japan, which is something maybe I should add these guys to my RSS feed because I'm curious. They had a very detailed article about these kind of finances and did give that space a little bit more coverage. So I'm not sure if they are specifically kind of focused around this. Skipping through their website, I do not see a lot of initially things that read to me as more of like blockchain crypto focused kind of stuff. So I think it's interesting. Like usually when I end up on like these kind of blockchain crypto stories, it's usually with a news outlet that is specifically focused on that. And well, maybe I should take that back. English stories. Japanese stories I think get around a lot more. Especially with like 4Gamer and things like that is usually the first place I kind of hear about them. But yeah, Automated Media, a few times I've dug into their stories a little further and it's like, oh, this all goes back to a blockchain developer, but they just don't really like dig into it very much. So, which again, I'm not really blaming them. So, because this is something that nobody cares about right now, but Gumi does because they're making money apparently. So interesting. I'd be curious to hear more about it. I don't think we will hear more about it. But I just thought it would be important given, the fact that we've talked about a lot of very negative things around blockchain stuff and things like that in terms of, let's say, business specifically, right? I don't want to get into the whole, like, okay, what is the environmental stuff? What is the whole, like, we were talking a little bit about, like, last week about, like, the ethics of this kind of stuff, right? Gamified investment and things like that. But from a business perspective, this is the first time I've heard somebody say, hey, we made money in a very long time. So I just thought it was worth noting given we continue to talk about this. So, anyways, that's that for that. And then also, lastly, this is not really a news story. I'm sure every single one of you listening knows PS5 Pro got announced. And then also something that happened, which as far as I can tell, maybe this was debunked at some point. The Go Nintendo article I linked, which said the word leaked in the title, has an update, and it says that it seems likely that whatever this leak was may have come from somebody who is known for making like 3D printed shells and things like that. It was basically kind of showing off like this is supposedly the Nintendo Switch successor kind of thing. And whether it's real or not, I don't really care right now. I'm not somebody who like wants to dig through the Switch speculation. But I've seen this story go around. And the picture of that was on there was, hey, man, the Nintendo Switch successor in these pictures just looks like a Nintendo Switch. A bigger Nintendo Switch, some slight changes to some of the controller design and things like that. But it just looks like a Nintendo Switch. Now, obviously, we have no idea what's going on with this thing. Again, this may not even be true, so I just want to put this down there. But it was making me think a little bit about just like, okay, what gets a modern Nintendo fan happy? You know, one of the things, if you donate to me on Ko-fi, you would have heard the Nintendo video that I did the audio for. You know, a lot of that video is me talking about just kind of like a set of values that Nintendo built up within me in a lot of ways through their marketing and their PR and things like that, and how I think that has continued to impact me today and how I look at video games in a way that, you know, maybe was not intended for them. But like one of the things that I think about is just like, for the longest time, since I got super excited about watching game coverage, right? Since I started getting into like the whole Wii remote kind of thing of just like, what is the Wii? What does a Wii remote look like? And it's already saying its controller is like something we've never imagined before, right? And in some ways, we imagined it. It's a TV remote. But, you know, the idea of playing a game with a TV remote is not something that was like regularly something people were thinking about, unless you're like an Intellivision or something guy. But, you know, the Wii remote, I think we can all agree, is very different than like an Intellivision controller or something like that, right? So anyways, point being is, you know, I like this is very much this excitement of like, what's next? What is Nintendo going to do next? And the Wii U, despite all its issues, I think at least at launch, if you knew what was going on, had that feeling of like, what is this and how will this change the games I play? And the answer with the Wii U is that other than Zombie U, not much. And then even with the Switch, I think I was looking at it a little bit and was just like, hey, you know, they're talking about HD Rumble. You know, there's like the portability to console aspect's pretty cool, but mechanically we've never seen anything done with that. But at the time, I don't know if I really thought that might be a thing, but it was like potentially that could be something where like maybe a game would play with you being able to play portably on a console. But, you know, I don't think with the Switch Lite these days you can really rely on that, right? And then also, you know, the idea of the Joy-Cons being kind of the front and center motion controller kind of again, and what that could potentially do with, you know, the way we control games. You know, obviously it's not that much further than the Wii remote, but at the same time you get two fully gyro capable Joy-Con controllers, right? And so there's potential something could be done with that, right? Switch, I would say, out of all of them, probably the least like immediately exciting thing. There's like something cool with like Super Mario Party where like you put two Switches together. That was kind of neat. Anyways, point being, I get really excited about Nintendo hardware because something new is about to happen, right? There's going to be some change in the way I interface with games, which I think is one of the things that the Nintendo Switch didn't really do for me, because I was looking for that. And I feel like other than Nintendo Labo, I did not find that, right? And I need to spend more time in Nintendo Labo still. That is something I still need to do. Point being, though, is, you know, looking at this design, I had to kind of take a step back and ask, like, okay, what and why, right? Because when it comes to my perception of like what a Nintendo hardware launch means, that is not what it is, right? 60 frames per second or better frame rate. Let's put it that way. Better frame rate, higher resolution, DLSS. I don't know enough about it, but as far as I've seen it utilized, it seems to mostly just be about like, hey, we can render at a lower resolution and then just kind of bump it up, right? That doesn't seem to be any real gameplay element other than just making your game run nicer, right? And so I really had to take a step back and ask the question of like, I don't know what gets people excited for this stuff. I did ask on Twitter and a few people did respond. I think the general response I got was software. Obviously software sells hardware, or at least most of the time that seems to be the case. I think even in cases with like the Nintendo Wii, the hardware only works if the software is there to sell it, right? I think the Wii U has that problem. Zombie U was not Wii Sports. As much as I want Zombie U to be Wii Sports, it's not. But you know, it is one of those things that I had to just kind of take a step back and think about. But that's one thing. The other thing was people saying that they would like to be able to play more modern games on their Switch more reliably, it sounds like. And you know, I think it's probably true that a lot of like indie stuff and things like that for sure all comes out on the Switch, you know, first or whatever, you know, whenever it comes out, right? Or maybe later or something like that. But yeah, it is one of those things where like the Switch version is going to guarantee be the worst version. And the Switch hardware is old at this point. I think people have done a lot of really good stuff with Switch, but even, you know, looking at Nintendo's titles, even on a Monolith Soft, you know, they're really struggling with some of the hardware limitations, right? to maintain what they got. So just kind of a better visual clarity, better look and kind of things. But like at the end of the day, like, I don't know. I bought this PS5 a year ago and I've played 2 PS4 games on it. Tokiden and what was the other thing? Ooh, what was the other thing? I played something else on it. I don't even remember. Anyways, but I've played my 2 PS4 games on it and I really just haven't done anything else with it. And I think a lot of my questions, admittedly I have a PC and I utilize my PC pretty frequently for multiplayer gaming specifically. And a lot of my PS4 playing was multiplayer gaming, I will say. So the fact that our PC playing, our multiplayer playing went to PC is a substantial change in my relationship with the PlayStation ecosystem, right? But like, yeah, I think when I played Street Fighter 6 on PS4, like, yeah, it doesn't run as well, and it's got some little janky thing here or there, but I don't think that impacted me in any meaningful way that changed my experience with Street Fighter 6, right? Street Fighter 6, the issues I have with that game is from a design perspective, and it's like not even really a problem. It is basically expecting the single player campaign to be the focus when it is not the focus, right? That's if you want to boil down my problem, that is what it is. I came in for the campaign. It's cute, it's fun, it's a little overly long, a little overly simple at times, but overall, that was the core focus of what I was coming in for, right? And so like, but yeah, that experience I don't think would have changed with the PS5, right? And so when I think about like, oh, well, like what could Mario Kart look like on a Switch 2? Like mentally, I can't imagine that because Mario Kart 8 looks great, right? Mario Kart 8 is a Wii U game that looks great. I was playing Dead Space on a PS3 like 5 months ago. I was like, man, other than the character models being a little goofy, this game looks great. Admittedly, that game has the benefit of a lot of lighting and a lot of dark spaces, right? So yeah, it is just a little challenging to sit here and ask myself, like, what am I excited for? And part of it's also I don't play the Switch portably, right? So being able to take a bigger game on the go is always kind of an appeal. And I think, like, to some extent, a lot of games that are made to get today are designed to be scalable. And so the Switch is definitely within that capability, but it's definitely something that I think a refresh would be good for it. Versus like a PS5 Pro, I don't know. My friend who is kind of big in the Sony ecosystem is buying one. However, it did take a little bit of pushing. And I think the thing that kind of put him over was the anniversary edition PlayStation 5. So he's like, oh, this is a good excuse to get a Pro now, right? He's bought into that ecosystem. He plays PlayStation all the time. And, that's his core platform. So that makes sense. But and I think that makes sense that like somebody who is like the core audience would want that little extra something, right? That little extra bit of power and things like that. So yeah, but yeah, I don't know. I don't regret buying a PS5 in the context of a PS5 Pro, I will say. Do I regret buying a PS5 overall? At this point, yes. But I do think if I were to play Final Fantasy 16, which is now on PC, I would rather just play that on a console where I know I'm not going to have any problems capturing it. But that's a me issue with capture, right? So it's a very different thing. So anyways, I think all of this kind of comes down to just like, I don't really know where we go from here. Admittedly, back in the day, Nintendo brainwashed me to feeling that way as well, right? They're like, what's the point of more power? And so maybe I'm just brainwashed in that sense. But, I feel like the jumps we saw, even from like PS2, Xbox, and GameCube to like 360, PS3, was still like fairly substantial. Admittedly, I think when you look at the earlier software library of any console, that is a little bit of a harder sell, right? But yeah, I just I think it is something that I really hope that Nintendo. I mean, maybe I shouldn't say I really hope. If Nintendo wants to get me excited, doing a Switch 2 that looks like a Switch just doesn't really get me excited, right? That doesn't necessarily mean there's like something that it couldn't do that'd be interesting. But I think anything they're going to do is probably not going to, I don't know. I like anything they're going to do, I think would be too conservative for me right now. I think there's just no reason for them to really go out on a limb. So, I don't think that's bad. I think, we're in an industry where everybody's being more conservative, even Nintendo, right? And so I just think it's just something that I'm just like, oh, okay. I think the real answer is that I would really like to sit down and someday kind of hash it out. Someday kind of hash it out with like somebody who's a more modern Nintendo fan. I want to know what the values of a modern Nintendo fan are, what they get excited for. You know, I think a lot of times we just kind of poke fun at like, oh yeah, more Mario. Do we do that? I don't know why I said that, but you know, I think a lot of times Nintendo, when Nintendo fans in the modern day are made fun of, maybe always, you know, it is very much like, hey, you only care about Nintendo IP, right? And I don't know if that's true in the first place. And then B, yeah, I don't really know. Like, what is a new Mario game that gets people excited? And I would say Mario Odyssey was a great game. I think Mario Bowser's Fury was great. Like, that game shouldn't be as good as it is, but it is. Unfortunately, you need to buy a whole other video game to get to it. But, you know, yeah. So, I don't know where to go from here. I'm not trying to be negative about it. I think what I'm saying is that I don't know what the future of these platforms look like. And I don't know if the future is aligned with what the consumer wants. Maybe that's what I'm asking. That's the question I'm asking. I'm not saying nobody wants this. I'm saying I don't know if this is something people want, but I have no evidence to say for or against. And me, as a Nintendo fan for what I was, am no longer particularly relevant in this conversation. So that's kind of, I think, my feeling on this discussion right now. So we may, we don't really talk about this kind of news that much anymore. We may follow it as it makes sense for us. How about that? How about that? How about that? Let me know. Are you excited? Tell me why Emio and how good will Emio and the Bagman Famicom Detective Club look on a Switch 2 at 4K? I don't know. I also don't know why people want to play Emio, but that's just like, again, that's not me saying anyone's wrong. I just have my personal feeling is like, you know what I probably should do at some point? I probably should sit down with somebody who's into visual novels and adventure games and say like, hey, what gets you excited for these games? Because obviously I can get excited for those games. Sure, I want to be a single mom with a deadbeat dad overseas, archaeologist man, and I want to go date some men. That exciting, right? Buddy Mission Bond, cool 3D things you're going around in, exciting. MEO Bagman, I don't know what to think about that game. And it's like, there's nothing wrong with it. It's just like, there's nothing right about it for me. So again, that's not a comment on the quality. That is a reading situation problem with me. Like I don't know what is the thing that catches people's eyes about these games. What is that little glimmer? Does there need to be a glimmer? But I feel like there has to be a glimmer. And maybe that glimmer is just Famicom Detective Club. And then also, actually, you know, in the Discord, we talked about it with Joseph. He's like, it's a very well-produced one of these, which is maybe not always the case as well. So maybe that's the other thing. It's like very nice production value adventure game, right? That's another thing. Anyways, I think it'd be good for me to have a conversation with somebody at some point about that kind of thing. And maybe that'll be a hot pot gaming thing if I can find the right person for it. There's a couple people I have in mind initially, but I'm trying not to reach out until I'm ready to record for most people, just because I think it adds a lot of confusion, especially with like the long delivery timeline on this kind of stuff. So speaking of long delivery times, guess what, Kofi fans? You are things are gonna slow down a little bit here because of the Portland Retro Game Expo and all that stuff. Demo Dory, thank you so much for donating again on this September afternoon. You did donate on this exact day, actually, of me recording this at least. And supporting us again for the month. Appreciate it. If you want to donate on Ko-fi, you'll get access to the Phantasy Star Online video that's about to come out already. So if you just wait on that, you might as well just wait. And then the audio of me talking about Nintendo stuff, the Nintendo video audio, if you want to check that out. I've just been busy lately with like all this Portland Retro Game Expo stuff, and PCFX fan club's definitely been kind of absorbing more of my time. So getting that video along further has been challenging. Maybe I'll take some time to reevaluate kind of my workload balance with Hot Pot Gaming, maybe this podcast, I've kind of stepped back from a lot of these kind of like casual reviews kind of things, trying not to do nearly as many of them again, all that kind of stuff. So, but that doesn't stop. This is the final really big update for this for now, unless I make new content. If you didn't see the Bourbon Metaverse, we had a video for that go up a couple weeks ago, so go check that out if you want to see me roam and talk about a snack universe. That video, I will say, opened it up myself for about 2 minutes. Takes a little while to get going. I'm just going to say that. But Oscar left a really cool comment on there, basically talking about the idea of like, I think there's some company who's like advertising in a bowling alley or something. You can play like a bowling alley game based off them and stuff like that. I think go read his thing. I don't remember if I'm remembering this right, but I do think there's something fun about like advert gaming in some ways, right? There's like that ramen balancing old like Hang On clone and things like that. And the Bourbon Metaverse doesn't feel like a game that's trying to, like, despite the negativity that comes with the metaverse term, Bourbon Metaverse does not feel like a space that's trying to be a competing metaverse in the metaverse space. It feels like somebody with a pet project that's just having a good time, which is like something I could just kind of respect. But I don't know. I'd be really curious if there was like an actual financial document about the Bourbon Metaverse out there. So learned about that through Automata Media. See? You wouldn't have that video unless I read Automata Media. Spin and Break. This is a really cool like Dojin game, a block breaking Dojin game. So block breaking games I have kind of a mixed feelings on in general, and Spin and Break doesn't really break any of the norms of block breaking games in that regard, but it has a cool like spin mechanic to it, if you can't guess by its name, and a really cool aesthetic. So that's a Dojin game up on my channel. Out of all the Dojin games I reviewed, if you are into kind of those more like niche Japanese kind of like aesthetic games, Spin and Break I think might be more up your alley, so go check that out. It is not the Collector Ninja of Dojin games. I love that Collector Ninja video because it is so tiny and in some ways completely pointless, but that's why I like that video, because it doesn't need to exist, yet it does. So, and then the next week I have the Hot Pot Gaming episode going up about Phantasy Star Online. A couple of guys who've been playing Phantasy Star Online for 20 plus years. Section Skyline and Deployable Lovers are their names. They have a YouTube channel. I think Deployable Lovers doing Lord of the Rings content right now, though, the MMORPG. So check that podcast out when it comes out. I get a little like self-conscious at the end of the podcast, just a heads up. I feel like I kind of went down a weird road at the end of that podcast. And in hindsight, listening to it again, I think mentally I was just not deciphering the situation very well and kind of went on like a weird tiny rant that didn't really make sense. But I left it in to show you that like, hey, I don't know what was going on with my mind, and here's my feedback about that. So listen to the end if you're like, Ben, what are you talking about? And especially in the back, like 20 minutes of the show. And then also that Phantasy Star Online video I've been talking about forever, the tiny menu that changed a game, Phantasy Star Online. This is a video about, if you remember, we've talked about it many times before, although I don't know if anyone actually like recalls the shortcut window in Phantasy Star Online. This video is a little rough in some way, especially when it comes to structure, but I think it's still a fun video either way. I try to make it fun and have a lot of like fun little editing things in it as well. So I hope you check that out and enjoy that. I don't expect it to be the biggest video in the world, so I expect it to come out and make a little tiny dip, and then I need to do some kind of follow-up. It's been literally, it's like almost 3 months until we hit the day of when the Stonebringer video came out, 1 year anniversary. It's been a while. That main channel has been neglected, and I feel so bad for it, but you know, life, trying to we all got lives going on. Donate on Kobe. And then also, so I think because I'm skipping the next podcast, this video will be out before we talk again. There's gonna be a WarioWare Snapped review that comes out, and then unless I create something new, I think that is maybe it for the rest of this year, unless I make some new OCP Plus content. I have some stuff that is in the pipeline that I haven't finished, so there's potential that stuff will show up. But just so you know, that kind of weekly rollout that I've been doing for a while, a lot of that work that I did earlier this year is kind of just drying up, and I haven't really been giving the secondary channel the time that I was in the first half of this year for sure. So yeah, figuring things out. Hopefully, Hot Pot Gaming has, I think, taken over a lot of effort, and in some ways that is good, in some ways that's bad. But I'm trying to keep the editing process for that simple still at the end of the day. Thank you again, Demodor. Excuse me. We're talking about a video game. I forgot. I scrolled down. I was like, oh, wait, there's more podcasts. We're only 50 minutes in. Mercenary Kings. This is a weird kind of like multiplayer Contra shooter with gun crafting mechanics. And when I was playing this in my group with multiplayer group, it was very much compared to like Monster Hunter with guns. And I'm not 100% sure if I'm on board with that description, but it does have a lot of like material gathering. It kind of has these standardized maps that you kind of navigate around, and enemies that appear in different subsections of the map and things like that, with different varieties for objectives and bosses kind of placed around the map itself. So I can see structure-wise why people would make that relation, especially with the crafting weapons and things like that. But you're basically these kind of like super-powered soldiers trapped on this island, and you're fighting like the Claw, I think is what they're called, or something. And sometimes like things in nature, like these little like mantigoras that are running around, are like a big part of the plot and things like that. It has a really colorful cast overall, like a lot of characters with like very kind of one-dimensional personalities based off their role and purpose and things like that. So but as you kind of do these missions and things out in the world and like kind of hunt different things, and well, really you're completing ranks is the big thing. Your kind of camp population grows, and so you start getting new services, people who can make little modules that like enhance you as a person. General supply store, crafting store, weapon or like melee crafting store, things like that. A food place that you can eat, all that kind of stuff. But gun crafting is really the focus here. So your gun crafting NPC is what we'll be spending all the time in this game. And basically how gun crafting works is that it's not so much that you're building one core gun as much as you are building a variety of parts that impact a gun's power, accuracy, firing type, and things like that. Now the firing type is kind of the basis here. You can kind of pick a base for your gun that's either like a submachine gun, shotgun, sniper rifle, that kind of stuff, right? Pistol, things like that. So what the attachments are more about is about adjusting things like your clip size. Sometimes it's like how accurate your bullets are and like the trajectory they come out of your gun at. It can also be the pure power of the shot and things like that as well. But the bullets you put in your gun have probably the most impact outside of the gun type, because these add different elements to your guns. You can have fire, ice, like a poison, caustic kind of thing. And these have like additional effects beyond just like, applying elemental damage to like an enemy that might be weak to it. It can also freeze enemies, or like in the case of the caustic one, it can like shoot through shields and things like that. But these bullets are kind of the hardest to like attach to your guns. Well, actually the elemental ones are actually fairly easy, but there's also bullet types that are make your bullets like bounce around and stuff, and there's like piercing shots and things like that, and like shatter shots that I think like break up your bullets into multiple pieces. So a lot of like little kind of bullet modifiers that you can have in combination to not only the rest of your gun and how it fires and stuff, but also like how your bullets impact with enemies and things like that, and what kind of trajectory they have and stuff like that. So you have to basically create a variety of parts that make it so you can actually equip these bullets. So you have to have the right button or gun combination to really make sure that you can actually equip bouncy bullets. Because if you don't have the right combination, most of the time you can actually equip these multiple pieces. Admittedly, I was mostly using a submachine gun, which seems a little bit more restrictive than most other guns in the game, I will say. So, so what you're doing is, you're kind of building these parts, and I'd say it's kind of like hard to really plan what your gun's going to look like. I think, generally you're just looking at either the base type and then the bullet type, and then trying to make some combination of that supports not only the base type you have, but also can be compatible with the bullet type you want to use, and then using the parts kind of in between to kind of like connect those bridges together. But it's kind of a hard thing to really connect if you're not really pursuing specific materials, if you're not finding the parts that you're like, hey, I need this to increase my bouncy bullet compatibility by 50% so I can get, basically 100% means that you have compatibility with a bullet. And so you have to like, create these different parts. But if you're just kind of going through the story normally, it doesn't necessarily mean you'll have those parts available. And it is actually pretty pricey as well to create these pieces. So even though you kind of have these two core parts, it feels like a lot of just like messing with little pieces in between and trying to figure out just like how to connect those two things. And by the time, if you're just like going through the story, you get to the next rank, a lot of times by the time you've built your weapon, you're kind of moving on to the next weapon, and that point you have to kind of restart the process over and over and over again. So the payoff because of that I think feels really minimal. Most enemies die pretty quickly, and they're just kind of straightforward. Hey, just shoot them, and yep. they will eventually die. Some exceptions include guys that have guns or shields, or guys that fly in the air, or maybe move around a little bit differently, but generally everything is just kind of stand in front of it and shoot. And if you're doing enough damage, ideally it will die before it gets a chance to hit you, and kind of thing. So I think the use cases of very specific guns and specific scenarios with specific elements are often very limited, which I will say is something that is a bit troublesome in a lot of weapon crafting games, is making sure, the weapons you're building are useful in a more dynamic range of elements or situations than just like these very narrow columns of things, right? So if you have like 6 elements, building 6 different weapons for those different elements can be a lot to ask for, especially when you're earlier on in the game and a lot of weapons are becoming obsolete very fast. So the control style of the game itself, though, despite all this, is pretty much your typical 2D kind of run and shoot kind of platformer thing. Like Contra-esque is how I always kind of compare it. You kind of run around, shoot things, platform a little bit. There's some additional items that you can kind of pick up for healing and reviving. Most items you have to kind of buy. Picking up stuff is usually not like, you can find healing stuff in the environment, but it's usually pretty limited and things like that. So most of what you're bringing items are things you're bringing in with you in your kind of backpack. And one of my favorite one is like, it's like a riot shield basically that allows you to like kind of block all bullets and stuff like that. I think that one has the most impact on like how you actually play the game. I wish it's a little bit more easy to use, because you have to kind of like switch between your gun and your riot shield as like your primary weapon to utilize it. But still, I think it can be very effective once you kind of get used to the controls of flicking around, what weapon you're on, and being able to swap back and forth between your gun and your riot shield back and back. So it adds a little bit of like light variety, but I think generally it feels very minimal. And I think especially in a game like this, where you have a lot of the stages that you're playing over and over and over again, and a lot of the platforming and stuff is the same every time. I think generally just what happens is at some point, probably about halfway through the game, it just kind of devolves into like kind of a repetitive kind of nature game, where it's just kind of like, yeah, I'm just going to kind of like make the next best thing I can, and then I'm just going to kind of run these same levels over and over and over again, and platform over the same platforms over and over and over again, and things like that, which again is not something that is necessarily bad inherently. I think there are games that have done that fairly well, but I think a lot of those games usually thrive in providing a lot of variety in how you navigate those environments. Or rather maybe variety in how you interact with like the monsters in those environments, especially in the case of like boss fights and things like that, where it's like, like a monster hunter or something like that, depending on the weapon you have and the monster you find, the environment might play a bigger role in how you actually fight the monster and things like that. Where this game, I don't really feel like that's the case. Most of the boss rooms are kind of locked off. They do have some platforms that occasionally show up that kind of like give you some options for the fight itself, but I would say mostly it's a pretty static room. You're just kind of watching the boss for when it jumps, and then rolling under it and then shooting it in the back over and over and over again. So, but yeah, I just think, it's just a game that just kind of, it's weird because the game looks great. Like on paper, the sprites look really good. They're these big chunky animated sprites that look really nice and everything. And it's like very overtly like humorous in a way that maybe is not actually maybe not great. It's not my favorite like humor. But it feels very kind of like, I don't know, it feels very dated in terms of its humor. I don't know how to describe it. It's not like saying a bunch of memes, although it does make a lot of pop culture references apparently. But it definitely feels like the way it communicates feels like an older way of communicating on the internet, like 10 years ago or something like that. I don't know why it feels weird to me, but yeah, I don't really like love the writing or anything, but visually it looks really great and stuff. So, I don't know. It's like weird that this game kind of comes together in the way that it does, and in some ways it feels very successful in the way it comes together, but like in the execution, especially in a long-term execution over the course of like I don't know how long it was, I forget how long we played it for. Let's say 20 or 30 hours. Go check how long to beat, I don't remember. But the course of that time frame, definitely I think just started to kind of weigh on me of just like, yeah, I just wish there's a little bit more meat to this game. Speaking of which, you can get some meat in that game and cook it up. Anyways, that's it for this week. Again, we're going to have a Hot Pod Gaming episode next week, and then I'm just going to chill for a week, and then we'll come back, and then we'll see where we're at from there. So If I didn't do that Final Fantasy 11 video already, or episode already, I might have taken this time to do that, pre-record that and send it. But really, honestly, the Portland Retro Game Expo just took up so much of my time. And if there's any downtime in between now, me working on this stuff, and me flying out there and getting ready for that event, I probably will take it to myself just to chill for a little bit before I go. It's been a stressful month and a half or so for a lot of different reasons. So that are beyond even just this kind of this podcast and all the other games to work on. Some of it's working through work stuff and all that stuff as well. So all that fun stuff, life. That's why we're here, baby. This is now a life podcast. I feel like in some ways it might have been for a while now. It's just kind of what has Ben been up to? Slipping in crypto news stories. Anyways, that's it. I'm going to be done. Thank you again for coming. Thank you again for donating, Demo Dory. I appreciate it. Again, check out that, what was it? The PSO podcast next week. I feel like there's something else that came out. Nope, there's just the PSO podcast next week. And then also the new featured video that's going to come out. That's going to be on the main One Killport Plus channel, the featured video. So that's going to come out a few days after that. Hopefully everything goes well because I'll be out of town. I probably should set up my tablet to make sure I can log in and make any adjustments if I need to. But if anything's drastically wrong, then the chances are I have to wait till I get back. So we shall see. But anyways, that's going to be it. You guys have a great month, I guess. I'll talk about PRG at some point, I'm sure, or at least on PCFX. I'll talk about it on PCFX podcast, and I'll tell you guys about it when I get there. So, goodbye.